Welcome to the Recaps channel. In today's video, we'll recap Flightplan. Let's get started. Kyle Pratt, an American aircraft engineer who recently lost her husband in Berlin, is having a difficult night. She must transport her husband's body on a flight to the US along with her 4-year-old daughter, Julia. To manage her anxiety, Kyle takes prescribed pills. The next morning, amidst the snow, a taxi awaits them to take them to the airport. While at the airport, Kyle becomes frantic when she realizes she has lost Julia. Eventually, Kyle spots Julia near a sundries stand and scolds her for wandering off without permission. Soon, Kyle and Julia board a plane that Kyle helped design, being the first to enter the cabin. As Julia looks out the window and draws a heart on the foggy glass, Kyle takes a nap. Upon waking up, Kyle realizes that Julia is no longer in her seat. Despite asking other passengers, nobody recalls seeing Julia. A flight attendant suggests that Julia might be playing with children her age. Kyle searches the aisle, growing increasingly anxious, but still cannot find Julia. She revisits their seat and discovers Julia's bear under the blanket, but Julia is nowhere to be found. Concerned, Kyle seeks assistance from a flight attendant named Stephanie. Stephanie agrees to help and announces a missing child. However, to Kyle's surprise, Stephanie later informs her that there is no record of her daughter boarding the flight. Kyle is left confused by this revelation. Despite her certainty that her daughter was on the flight, Kyle tries to prove it by showing her boarding pass, only to realize she can't find it. Additionally, Julia's backpack is missing from the overhead bin, which confuses Kyle because her daughter is too short to have reached it herself. Sky Marshal Jean Carson starts monitoring Kyle as she searches for Julia. Determined to involve the captain, Marcus Rich, in the search, Kyle demands to see him. Upon learning that there is no record of Julia boarding the flight, Captain Rich questions if Kyle is currently taking any medication. Kyle explains that she took sleeping pills to cope with anxiety after her husband's recent death. She reveals her disbelief that her husband's death was a suicide, explaining that he fell from their roof 6 days ago. The captain and other crew members suspect that Kyle's mental state has been affected by her husband's death, causing her to imagine bringing her daughter on the flight. Despite the skepticism, Kyle insists on searching the entire plane from front to back. Reluctantly, Captain Rich agrees and orders the crew to conduct a thorough search, turning on the cabin lights and instructing passengers to remain in their seats. Stephanie goes to the avionics section to look for Julia but doesn't find any 4-year-old girls. While Kyle continues her search, she notices an Egyptian passenger whom she vaguely recognizes but struggles to remember due to her frazzled state. Finally, Kyle asks the captain to search the cargo hold for Julia. Captain Rich refuses to allow the search in the cargo hold, expressing anger over the attention given to finding a child that they believe was never on the plane. Kyle reacts poorly to this decision and quickly approaches the Egyptian passenger. She accuses him of kidnapping her daughter, recalling that she saw him near her daughter's bedroom the previous night. The man denies the accusation and provides evidence of staying at a hotel far from Kyle's apartment. Chaos erupts as Kyle insists on forcing a confession from him, leading to a physical altercation. Sky Marshal Carson, frustrated with Kyle's behavior, remarks that her husband's death now seems more understandable. Shortly after, Captain Marcus receives a message from a Berlin hospital confirming that Julia was with her father when he fell from the roof and also passed away. The crew now believes that Kyle is experiencing delusions. Despite their belief, Kyle vehemently denies it, remaining convinced that Julia is alive and still on the plane. Viewing Kyle as a threat due to her fabricated story, Carson handcuffs her and keeps her restrained in her seat. A therapist named Lisa approaches Kyle, attempting to provide comfort, which only serves to deepen Kyle's doubts about her own sanity. She begins to reluctantly accept her daughter's death. However, her attention is drawn to a heart that Julia had previously drawn on the window next to her seat, which she realizes is real. Convinced that something strange is happening, Kyle persuades the therapist to allow her to use the bathroom. Instead, she sneaks into the upper compartment and sabotages the aircraft's electronics, causing the oxygen masks to deploy and interrupting the lighting. Panic ensues among passengers and crew, but Carson realizes that Kyle is responsible for the chaos. Kyle takes advantage of the turmoil, using a dumbwaiter to access the lower freight deck where she discovers her husband's casket. Suspecting that Julia might be inside, Kyle unlocks David's casket but only finds her husband's body. Carson discovers her and restrains her with handcuffs, announcing that the flight will make an emergency stopover at Goose Bay Airport where she will be taken into custody. As she is escorted back to her seat, a passenger begins to applaud, which spreads throughout the aircraft. Some passengers, including the Egyptian, stare at Kyle. She reaches the back row and sits down. Kyle pleads with Carson one last time, insisting on searching the plane upon landing. Carson takes a moment to consider and decides to speak to the captain. However, instead of doing so, he secretly goes down to the freight deck. There, he retrieves 2 explosives and a detonator hidden in David's casket. He then goes to the avionics section and attaches the explosives to the platform, revealing a sleeping Julia. The truth is revealed: Carson is the mastermind behind the entire situation. He and Stephanie conspired to hijack the plane and demand a $50 million ransom. They framed Kyle because of her knowledge of the aircraft and kidnapped Julia to force Kyle to unlock the casket where the explosives and detonator were placed. Carson informs the captain that Kyle is a hijacker and threatens to blow up the plane unless the airline transfers the money to a bank account. He confides in Stephanie that his plan involves detonating the explosives, killing the unconscious Julia, and leaving Kyle dead with the detonator in her hand. Kyle still finds it hard to believe everything that has unfolded and anxiously looks out of the window as the plane prepares for landing. Other passengers are confused by the emergency landing. After the plane lands, the passengers disembark. As the captain is leaving, Kyle confronts him, only to be met with his angry declaration that the ransom has been paid. This confuses Kyle, but she soon realizes that Carson is behind all of this. He manipulates the situation, making it seem like Kyle is a terrorist. Understanding the truth, Kyle decides to take advantage of her supposed role as a hijacker. She orders Carson to stay on the plane while instructing the rest of the crew to leave. Carson hesitates, but he realizes that if he refuses, the blame would fall on him. Once the plane's door is closed, Kyle knocks Carson unconscious using a fire extinguisher, handcuffs him to a rail, and takes the detonator from his pocket. Stephanie, who had been hiding, emerges. Carson regains consciousness and starts chasing Kyle, firing shots. She manages to lock herself in the cockpit. Kyle opens a hatch door to the plane's attic and tosses out a binder to deceive Carson. Hearing the noise from above, Carson leaves. Kyle exits the cockpit and encounters a guilt-ridden Stephanie. Kyle punches her, causing Stephanie to panic and quickly flee the plane. Kyle continues her search for her daughter, making her way to the avionics section, where she finds Julia unconscious. She embraces her daughter and carries her. Carson soon catches up, and during their search, he reveals that he killed Kyle's husband to smuggle the explosives inside his casket, knowing it would avoid detection at the checkpoint. Kyle swiftly carries Julia into the non-combustible hold of the aircraft, holding the detonator as Carson shoots at her while she closes the door. Safely inside the protected walls of the hold, she detonates the explosives, causing the plane to explode and killing Carson. Passengers and crew watch in shock as the explosion unfolds. Shortly after, Kyle emerges with her daughter, carrying her onto the tarmac. The passengers, now realizing that Kyle had been telling the truth all along, are astonished. The next day, at the airport terminal, Captain Rich approaches Kyle and apologizes for his initial skepticism. Stephanie is taken away by the FBI in handcuffs, and an agent informs them that the director of the Berlin mortuary has also been arrested. Kyle carries Julia through the crowd of passengers, who are now aware of the truth. They are stunned and feel a sense of guilt for not believing her. Before loading her daughter into a van for their departure, Julia wakes up and sleepily asks if they have arrived yet. Finally, the Egyptian passenger shows respect and forgiveness by assisting Kyle in picking up her bag. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share if you enjoyed the video. See you again here on the Recaps channel.